White opens the game with e4, and black responds in kind with e5. White's most popular, as well as reliable option is the straightforward knight f3, adding pressure against black's center. This move also supports the typical pawn break d4, either directly or after first preparing this with c3 at a favorable moment. A far more radical pawn break takes us back to the Romantic era of chess, f4. This ultra-aggressive move is known as the King's Gambit. White immediately confronts black's center, offering the f-pawn with the aim to gain central dominance and build a dangerous kingside attack. f7 is a key target for white, so bishop c4 is a common element. If white is able to remove the f4 pawn from the board, then placing a rook on f1 to add pressure down the f-file is also a thematic idea. Achieving this dream attacking scenario is easier said than done. The risky King's Gambit immediately weakens the e1 to h4 and g1 to a7 diagonals, compromising the long-term safety of white's king. Let's begin our journey with black's most direct response, the King's Gambit accepted with e takes f4. Not only does this move accept the pawn, it also prepares the dangerous queen h4 check, as the f4 pawn discourages white from blocking this check with g3. Knight f3 is the most natural way to respond to this possibility, but we'll briefly mention that white may ignore black's threat and play bishop c4. Known as the Bishop's Gambit, the King's Gambit is considered risky enough, and the Bishop's Gambit variation invites additional danger to white's king. Black has a variety of options that can be explored, including knight c6, considered by some grandmasters and neural network engines as a way to put this entire line under serious doubt. The knight controls the d4 square, and prepares to greet knight f3 with the dynamic g5. World-class grandmaster Wesley So has responded with d5, returning the sacrificed pawn in order to accelerate development, preparing to meet bishop takes d5 with knight f6. Challenging the center with knight f6 may also be considered. And of course, black may continue with the direct queen h4 check. Since g3 runs into f takes g3, threatening the discovered check g2, as well as revealing the queen's pressure against the e4 pawn. White's king understandably seeks shelter on the newly vacated f1 square. The king is awkwardly placed on f1, but white argues it will not be simple to exploit its position, while also looking forward to gaining a tempo against the queen with knight f3. This position is not without some complications, as bishop c5, threatening checkmate on f2, is well met by d4, taking over the center while gaining a tempo against the bishop. The interested viewer is encouraged to explore the main line starting with d6. This modest-looking move helps support the center and prepares an instructive plan to mobilize the queenside. White may challenge black's queen with the tempo-gaining knight f3. In response, black's queen should still defend the f4 pawn, so queen f6 is one option, and another path is queen h6. This move still supports the f4 pawn while also preparing a future g5 advance. The knight on g8 also appreciates the f6 square remains available for development. In response, white may grab more central space with d4, while also revealing the dark-squared bishop's pressure against f4. When black can reveal an instructive idea, starting with bishop e6, challenging white's light-squared bishop while preparing knight d7 and queenside castling. If white captures the bishop, then black is prepared to play f takes e6, undoubling the f-pawns and helping control the center. d5 does gain a tempo against the bishop, but it also restricts white's active light-squared bishop, while also opening up the long dark-squared diagonal. This may become important if black plays g5, followed by bishop g7. If white supports the light-squared bishop while continuing to develop with queen e2, black may respond with knight d7. Black is ready to castle queenside, while preparing a kingside initiative with g5, maintaining a material advantage with promising chances. White will certainly seek practical chances in the complications, but objectively this is not a promising line to justify white's aggressive play. In response to the King's Gambit accepted, white's most popular choice is knight f3, addressing the queen h4 issue while also preparing to support d4. If black is willing to follow white's lead and embrace a weakening of the kingside for concrete reasons, then we'll see a variation as old as the King's Gambit itself, the so-called classical variation, g5. This is a direct way to challenge white's entire opening setup. After capturing the f4 pawn, black reinforces the extra pawn with g5, questioning white's compensation for the sacrificed pawn. g5 also has the concrete threat of advancing to g4, and if white decides to move the threatened knight, queen h4 check becomes quite unpleasant. With this in mind, the desirable d4 is discouraged. The king's gambit has never been accused of being an overly passive opening, and white may choose to ignore black's concrete threat with bishop c4, focusing on rapid development, targeting the weak f7 pawn. This invites black to continue with the concrete g4, attacking the knight, and if white moves the knight to safety, queen h4 check is unpleasant. This means that white started with a pawn sacrifice and now offers an entire piece sacrifice by castling. This dangerous, ultimately dubious variation is known as the Muzio Gambit. White simply castles, inviting black to accept the knight with g takes f3, allowing white to create major piece pressure on the f-file with queen takes f3. White has sacrificed an entire piece but has a dangerous lead in development. Queen takes f4 is threatening to overwhelm black's defenses, so a strong reply is queen f6, protecting the f4 pawn, so an eventual queen takes f4 would lead to an exchange of queens, greatly reducing white's attacking chances. The queen doesn't just defend the f4 pawn, queen d4 check threatens to win the bishop. In response to queen f6, white may spend a tempo on d3, supporting the light-squared bishop while opening up the dark-squared bishop's pressure against f4. Black may decide to play bishop h6, supporting the f4 pawn. A more active way to develop the dark-squared bishop is with bishop c5 check. And a strong reply worth reviewing is knight c6, eyeing the d4 and e5 central squares. Perhaps d3 is the best way for white to proceed, but objective evaluations are usually not the highest priorities for a king's gambit player. In this case, white may offer another pawn with e5, opening up the e-file after queen takes e5. And now that the queen no longer protects f7, white can take an all-or-nothing approach by, you guessed it, sacrificing yet another piece with bishop takes f7 check, trying to expose black's king after king takes f7. Black is currently up 2 pieces, but white offers yet another pawn with d4, opening up the dark-squared bishop to possibly blast open the f-file with bishop takes f4. Although black has happily accepted all of white's offered material, it's time to act more cautiously before accepting any additional gifts from white. Accepting the d4 pawn is an objectively sound, although somewhat risky decision, as it allows some unnecessary complications after queen takes d4 check. White is prepared to deliver the surprising shot, bishop e3. Black cannot capture the bishop, as queen takes e3 takes advantage of the pinned f-pawn. In order to justify this path, black should play the accurate queen g7, preparing to meet queen takes f4 check with knight f6, when black should still objectively enjoy a superior game, assuming the complications are handled properly. Notice that once the knight on g8 enters the game, black can play rook g8, creating dangerous pressure down the g-file. Returning the queen to f6 is also possible, although in this case white can play knight c3, when ideas of harassing black's queen with knight d5 or knight e4 may prove annoying. One thing is certainly clear about this variation: black should not continue to accept offered material with queen takes b2. White's rook on a1 is suddenly hanging, but in spite of this incredible material disadvantage, the power of white's developed forces, coupled with black's insecure king, leads to a winning game for white after queen takes f4 check, unleashing the powerful queen-rook battery on the f-file. In response to queen f4 check, any king move leads to a forced checkmate. If black decides to play knight f6, this is well met by bishop d4, attacking the enemy queen, defending the rook on a1, as well as adding pressure against the pinned knight on f6. If black tries to block the check with queen f6, white has the strong reply queen c4 check, attacking the king while revealing the rook's attack against the pinned queen. Black's position is simply falling apart. Rather than entertaining white's wild desires with queen takes d4 check, black can remain content being up an entire piece with the calm response queen f5, inviting white to exchange queens with queen takes f4 when any fleeting attacking dreams vanish, so white would simply be down a piece without sufficient compensation. If white continues with bishop takes f4, we can see the value in black's queen deciding to move to f5, as the slumbering kingside suddenly wakes up with knight f6, adding another shield for black's king on the f-file when ideas such as bishop g7 and rook e8 completing development emphasizes white's lack of compensation for the sacrificed material. When confronted with g5, white's main response is h4. It may seem strange, which is especially a relative term in the king's gambit, for white to encourage black to play g4. This disruptive pawn thrust occupies the h4 square, so after the g-pawn advances, white does not have to worry about queen h4 check when the knight moves to safety. The timing of h4 is important because if white waited one more move, black could have developed the dark-squared bishop to g7, protecting the rook on h8, so black could respond to h4 with h6, securing the extra pawn. By immediately striking with h4, h6 is not a possibility, as white can simply play h takes g5, revealing the rook's pressure against the pinned pawn on h6. Capturing the h4 pawn is not a good decision, as white can take over the center with d4, when white will soon collect the f and h pawns with an excellent position. As is typical in these sharp g5 lines, black must confront white's play energetically, in this case advancing the g-pawn forward, confronting white's knight, but removing the defense of black's extra f4 pawn. If white plays knight g5, known as the Allgaier Gambit, just like the Muzio Gambit, this is quite dangerous, but with accurate play black should emerge with the better game. This aggressive knight lunge does not provide any safe escape squares, so if black wants to challenge the soundness of this approach, then h6 is a concrete solution, encouraging white to play the forced, but ultimately dubious knight takes f7. White should not be able to achieve full compensation for this sacrifice, but precise play and careful analysis will be needed to demonstrate this in practice. If black does not want to spend the time preparing for these complications, then knight f6, as well as striking in the center with d5, are both more than adequate replies to this less common continuation. Rather than committing to a speculative sacrifice with knight g5, white's more reliable, as well as popular continuation is knight e5. Known as the Kizaritsky Gambit, white centralizes the knight while adding pressure against the weak f7 and g4 pawns. We reach an important crossroads. Black should avoid attacking the h4 pawn with bishop e7, as white can simply ignore the threat and play the powerful bishop c4, vacating the f1 square for white's king, while intensifying the pressure against black's king side. If black wants to shift gears and steer the game toward calmer waters, d6 is a solid choice, allowing white to regain material in order to focus on solid development, a line the interested viewer is encouraged to explore. On the other hand, if black wants to continue with aggressive, uncompromising play, then we may see the mainline response, knight f6, focusing on development that not only supports the g4 pawn, but more importantly, adds pressure against white's center. Knight takes g4 is well met by knight takes e4. d4 is another option to consider, but white's most active continuation is bishop c4, intensifying the pressure against f7, when black should strike back in the center with d5. Surrendering the bishop with bishop takes d5 is not a desirable choice, so white plays e takes d5, opening up the e-file, allowing tactical opportunities as the kings remain in the center. One path to explore is bishop g7, but black's most popular choice is to centralize the bishop with bishop d6. The King's Gambit offers a seemingly endless supply of sacrificial opportunities. Gambit fanatics may explore castling, preparing to meet bishop takes e5 with d4, leading to sharp but ultimately dubious play. A simpler and more reliable path is to support the knight with d4, fighting for the center while revealing the dark-squared bishop's pressure against the f4 pawn. It's not out of the question to castle, returning the f4 pawn. But if black wants to continue to sharpen the play, then we'll see the main response, knight h5, defending the f4 pawn while eyeing the weak g3 square. White has no shortage of interesting options, including the surprising choice to castle directly into the storm. This move looks like a complete blunder, as the h4 pawn is now hanging. Incredibly, black's most reliable choice is likely to follow suit by castling, a line worth exploring, because if black plays queen takes h4, although this is by no means a bad move, white can play the resourceful queen e1, offering an exchange of queens while aligning with the enemy king. Knight g3 would be an incredible blunder, allowing white to play knight g6, discovering the queen's attack against the king, while attacking black's queen on h4. In response to queen e1, black should not fear an exchange of queens with queen takes e1, rook takes e1. But this complex position filled with tension provides roughly balanced chances. Castling kingside is definitely an interesting option to explore. Grandmaster Emanuel Berg demonstrated another path by deciding to bring the other knight into the action with knight c3. This is a good moment for black's king to escape the center by castling, but Grandmaster Nils Grandelius decided to pin the knight with queen e7. Certainly there's nothing wrong with this move, although black must remain alert with his two most valuable pieces aligned on the e-file. Queen e7 is a tricky move, and it appears white simply stumbles into a trap by castling. Queen takes h4 would simply enter the line we just discussed a tempo down, when once again this move is well met by queen e1. Moving the f-pawn weakens the g1 to a7 diagonal, leading to white's king. So black tries to exploit this by playing bishop takes e5. It appears white is simply busted, as d takes e5 fails to queen c5 check, winning the light-squared bishop. Attempting to pin the dark-squared bishop with rook e1 also fails, in this case to bishop takes d4 check, as white's overworked queen cannot both protect the rook while capturing black's bishop. The king's gambit is not an opening to take lightly, and just as things appear to be falling apart, Grandmaster Berg unleashes the resourceful shot, knight b5. The knight adds pressure against black's queenside, and more importantly, it supports the d4 pawn. This means that if black plays a6 immediately, white can reply with rook e1, since bishop takes d4 falls to knight takes d4. Throughout the video we have discussed black often having good chances to emerge from the complications with favorable positions. Although this is often the case, we must not forget that we are able to calmly explore these positions outside the heat of battle. The king's gambit is a rare opening, not without some justification, but facing this ultra-aggressive opening as black can be a psychological struggle. White is usually better prepared and has more experience, and in this position, a player of Grandmaster Grandelius' strength is unable to solve his opening problems. Moving the dark-squared bishop to safety would run into rook e1, attacking the pinned queen. Black should be able to look to the future with optimism after castling the king to relative safety. This does return the material after d takes e5, preparing to evict white's knight with a6, when black should enjoy reasonable chances in this complicated position. Instead of castling, black decided to return the piece with knight d7, leading to the forced sequence d takes e5, regaining the piece while opening up the g1 to a7 diagonal, which black attempts to exploit with queen c5 check, creating a double attack against white's king and unprotected light-squared bishop. So white can respond with queen d4. Black's position is suddenly critical. The only way to stay afloat is by trading queens with queen takes d4 check, knight takes d4. After the exchange of queens, black is able to capture white's e5 pawn, while also attacking the light-squared bishop. Pinning the knight with rook e1 is well met by f6, so Grandmaster Berg played the disruptive bishop b5 check. White enjoys a lead in development and is prepared to open the f-file with bishop takes f4, regaining material with an active position. From this advantageous situation, Grandmaster Berg was able to outplay his opponent and secured the win by grinding out a rook and pawn ending, not always the type of ending we'd expect from the king's gambit. g5 is certainly a sharp and exciting way to confront the king's gambit, but committing to these concrete complications are not for everyone, especially putting in the work to prepare against an opening they may rarely see in practice. These players may also find interesting ways to challenge the king's gambit, including knight f6, known as the shallop defense. The main point is to prepare to strike in the center with d5, and if white decides to confront the knight with e5, this is well met by knight h5, protecting the f4 pawn, when black will see counterplay with d6 or d5, depending on the circumstances. Former world champion Bobby Fischer once famously claimed that d6 was a refutation to the king's gambit, and although this is by no means a bust to the king's gambit, Bobby's argument is that g5 becomes stronger once knight e5 is no longer a resource. If black would prefer a relatively low maintenance, solid response against the king's gambit, black can strike in the center immediately with d5. Instead of trying to refute the king's gambit by holding on to the f4 pawn, black simply focuses on achieving a comfortable position with straightforward development. White responds to the central strike with e takes d5. Rather than exposing the queen with queen takes d5, black may patiently develop and increase the pressure against this weak pawn with knight f6, preparing to capture on d5 with the knight. If white tries to hold on to the pawn with c4, not only does this restrict white's light-squared bishop, black has the strong response c6, inviting d takes c6, when black's other knight enters the action with knight takes c6, enjoying great central control with an active position. The disruptive bishop b5 check is worth exploring, when black can respond with c6, preparing the same idea we just discussed with interesting play. In one high-level encounter, Grandmaster Hikaru Nakamura supported the center and activated his light-squared bishop with bishop c4. When his opponent, Grandmaster Michael Adams, continued with knight takes d5, Hikaru decided to castle his king. Bishop e7, preparing to castle, is one way to continue, but Grandmaster Adams decided to play bishop e6. Black will likely play bishop e7 followed by kingside castling, but bishop e6 is a flexible choice. Since the light-squared bishop x-rays its counterpart on c4, white must be careful not to play the automatic d4. Grabbing central space and opening up the dark-squared bishop's pressure against f4 is a desirable idea. In this particular case, however, this is a mistake, as black can exploit the weakened e3 square with knight e3, forking the queen and rook and joining the light-squared bishop in attacking the unprotected bishop on c4. White's best response in this difficult position is bishop b5 check, which is well met by c6, continuing to pressure white's light-squared bishop. A serious mistake would be bishop takes e3, when black can play the powerful bishop takes c4, attacking white's rook on f1 while the dark-squared bishop continues to hang, so white is losing material. Instead of rushing forward with the d-pawn, Nakamura spent a tempo to secure his light-squared bishop with bishop b3. This is a crafty move, intending to grab more central space by advancing the d and c pawns forward. Grandmaster Adams anticipated this idea by playing the solid c5, fighting for control over the d4 square, so white cannot expand in the center uncontested. d3 is a slower approach. d4 is also still possible, allowing c takes d4, followed by bishop c5. Hikaru decided to play king h1, moving the king away from the dangerous g1 to a7 diagonal, before striking in the center with d4, leading to interesting, double-edged play. After many twists and turns, with mutual chances, Grandmaster Nakamura ended up bringing home the full point. As we conclude our initial journey in the King's Gambit, it's worth mentioning that although e takes f4 is a strong choice for black, it is by no means forced. F takes e5 is actually not a threat at the moment, since f takes e5 would allow queen h4 check, preparing to capture the e4 pawn with an overwhelming advantage. One idea that reduces white's options is to immediately strike in the center with d5. F takes e5 is a terrible mistake, allowing queen h4 check. And after e takes d5, the adventurous viewer can explore the Falkbeer counter gambit with e4. But this can also just be a practical move order, often transposing into the line we just examined after e takes f4, when white's most common response is to transpose with knight f3, knight f6. We reach the same position we just examined, but by playing d5 before capturing the pawn on f4. This prevents white from playing bishop c4 on the third move, completely bypassing the bishop's gambit we examined at the beginning of the video. Playing d5 is a nice move order trick to keep in mind, and black may also decide to delay or ignore capturing the f4 pawn completely. If black wants to try and exploit the weakened g1 to a7 diagonal, an interesting option is bishop c5, taking advantage of the e5 pawn's current immunity from capture, controlling the center while slicing through the weakened dark squares for the time being. White typically continues with knight f3, intensifying the pressure against e5, so black reinforces the center with d6. If black is left undisturbed, then classical development with moves such as knight c6 and knight f6 can be expected. Black may pin the knight with bishop g4, and on a really good day, knight g4, joining the dark-squared bishop's pressure against the f2 square could prove annoying. White does not have to fear this setup, and certainly may continue with straightforward development with moves such as knight c3 and bishop c4. That being said, if white wants to challenge black's active dark-squared bishop, then an interesting option to explore is c3. White is prepared to strike in the center with d4, restricting black's dark-squared bishop. Natural developing moves such as knight f6 and knight c6 certainly can be explored, but an interesting option is to anticipate the tempo-gaining d4 by playing bishop b6. Since the c3 pawn restricts white's knight on b1, one way to enter the game is with knight a3 and possibly knight c4, harassing the dark-squared bishop. Grabbing space with a4 is also worth considering. The main point behind bishop b6 is that if white strikes in the center with d4, d4 no longer attacks the bishop on c5, allowing black greater flexibility with how to handle the center. One interesting idea is e takes d4, preparing to greet c takes d4, with the central strike d5, disturbing white's broad center. White certainly may grab space with e5. White enjoys more central and kingside space, but this is a double-edged factor in this positional struggle. Black may consider the interesting plan of knight h6, preparing to add additional pressure against white's central d4 pawn with knight f5. This is just one of several directions the king's gambit declined with an early bishop c5 may lead you. The king's gambit takes us back to the romantic era of chess, when sacrificing material at all costs to seize the initiative and hunt down the enemy king was the golden path to pursue. Defensive technique has greatly improved since the 19th century, but the king's gambit's dynamic, ultra-aggressive style may still find a place in 21st century chess. There are several avenues for black to explore that not only equalize, but may also put the king's gambit itself under serious pressure. Try as black may, a refutation to this risky gambit has proven elusive. When one avenue appears closed, another ingenious path is often discovered, allowing the king's gambit to live another day. Although many modern grandmasters feel it's too much work to justify the incredible risk inherent in the king's gambit, we still see grandmasters experiment with this opening from time to time, including world champion Magnus Carlsen. If your next opponent is unlikely to be a grandmaster, the king's gambit can be a deadly weapon to face, especially if black lacks experience and proper preparation. Thanks for exploring this romantic opening, and best of luck the next time the king's gambit makes an appearance in your game.